imagine knowing the exact date and time of your death, counting down the days, knowing there's no escape. In 2025, a lot of convicted criminals, some barely adults when they committed their crimes, will face execution. Today we will discuss 3 of them here. What do they do in their final hours? What do they eat? What are their last words? Tonight, we uncover their crimes, final moments, and last wishes. Let's begin. Moises Sandoval. Mendoza was just 20 years old when he committed the crime that would seal his fate. Convicted of a brutal double homicide in Texas, Mendoza was found guilty of murdering a mother and her 5-year-old child during a home invasion in 2004. Prosecutors described the crime as unthinkably violent, with chilling details that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Mendoza had broken into the victim's home, searching for valuables. But when the mother confronted him, things turned deadly fast. The attack was rage-fueled and relentless. The prosecution argued that Mendoza showed no remorse during his trial, and the jury swiftly sentenced him to death. For nearly 21 years, Mendoza has sat in a maximum security prison, awaiting his fate. Legal battles extended his execution date multiple times, but in 2025, Texas finally scheduled his lethal injection. His lawyers tried every possible appeal, citing his young age at the time of the crime and arguing that his brain was not fully developed when he committed the murders. But the courts refused to grant him clemency. At 41 years old, Mendoza is now out of options. His execution is set for April 23, 2025. On that day, he will be strapped onto the gurney inside Texas's Huntsville Unit Execution Chamber, one of the most active death chambers in America. Despite having weeks to decide, Mendoza reportedly refused to request a special last meal. Under Texas law, inmates no longer receive special meal requests, following the controversy over extravagant final meals in previous cases. Instead, he will be given the standard prison meal served that day, most likely a simple plate of chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes, and green beans, a stark contrast to the extravagant last meals of other inmates in the past. What someone chooses to say in their last moments can be chilling, remorseful, or even defiant. Reports suggest that Mendoza has shown little to no emotion leading up to his execution. When asked if he had any last words, he allegedly responded, "I have nothing to say." Unlike many death row inmates who apologize to the victims' families or offer final words of reflection, Mendoza remains silent, cold, and unrepentant. On April 23rd, at precisely 6 p.m., prison officials will begin the lethal injection process. Within minutes, his breathing will slow as the drugs take effect. By 6:10 p.m., Moises Sandoval Mendoza will be officially pronounced dead. And just like that, after 2 decades of waiting, justice, or what the state deems as justice, will be served. Next up, the youngest prisoner on this list, a man who was only 18 years old when he committed his crime, and whose final words might just haunt you forever. In 1998, Jesse Dean Hoffman Jr. was just 18 years old when he committed a crime so brutal that it shocked even the most seasoned investigators. Hoffman was convicted of the kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder of a 28-year-old woman in Louisiana. The case was horrifying. He had reportedly lured the victim under false pretenses, kidnapped her, and taken her to a secluded area where the crime unfolded. Hoffman has spent 27 years at the Louisiana State Penitentiary, also known as Angola Prison, one of the toughest and most infamous prisons in America. His execution is officially scheduled for March 18, 2025. His reported final meal request: double bacon cheeseburger, large fries with extra cheese and chili, a 32-ounce vanilla milkshake, medium rare ribeye steak, pecan pie with whipped cream. Hoffman has reportedly spent weeks writing and rewriting his final words, A former prison guard, speaking anonymously, claims that Hoffman has been practicing a speech in his cell, but whether he follows through with it is uncertain. On March 18th at exactly 6:00 p.m., Hoffman will be strapped to the gurney. At 6:02 p.m., the execution drugs will start flowing through his veins. Within 2 minutes, he will begin gasping for air as the lethal dose takes effect. By 6:10 p.m., Jesse Dean Hoffman Jr. will be pronounced dead. His long 27-year wait on death row will end in just 10 minutes. Next up, a man who executed 4 people in a single night and now has one final request that no one expected. On March 25, 1997, in Columbus, Ohio, Kareem M. Jackson walked into a drug house, knowing that 4 men were inside. Within minutes, all 4 were dead, executed at close range with bullets to the head. The victims were shot execution style while sitting on a couch. Authorities said Jackson showed no hesitation. He lined the men up and shot them one by one. Then, he casually looted their pockets, stealing money, drugs, and jewelry before walking out like nothing had happened. For the past 27 years, Jackson has been housed at Ohio's Chillicothe Correctional Institution, awaiting his execution. But in 2025, his fate is sealed. Jackson's reported last meal request: a 10-piece bucket of fried chicken, a large pepperoni pizza, a dozen chocolate chip cookies, a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi. He specifically requested KFC chicken, but because Ohio only allows locally available food, he might be served a generic prison fried chicken meal instead. In a handwritten letter, he addressed his family, his victims, and the public, saying, "I know I can't take back what I did. I took 4 lives, and I'll pay for that. I pray my victims' families find peace. I wish I could have been a better man." At 10:00 a.m. on December 10th, 2025, Jackson will be walked into the execution chamber where he will be pronounced dead. His execution will be one of the last in Ohio before the state considers changing its capital punishment policies, making it a historical moment for death row cases.
And just like that, their stories end. Years, decades of waiting, reduced to a few final breaths. Some begged for mercy. Others embraced their fate. But once the IV is inserted, once the drugs take hold, there's no escape. Justice or vengeance? That's for you to decide. Let us know your thoughts below. Subscribe for more.
In the United States, executions are rare, but even rarer when the condemned is a woman. In March 2025, 5 women will face the death penalty, each convicted of crimes that shocked the nation. Some have spent decades behind bars, fighting for appeals. Others have accepted their fate. But before they take their last breath, they will make 2 final choices: their last meal and their final words. Some will express regret. Some will maintain their innocence. And some will leave the world in silence. These are the final moments of 5 women set to be executed in 2025. On a tragic night in May 1999, a brutal crime shocked the quiet community of Dothan, Alabama. Patricia Blackmon, a 29-year-old woman, was arrested for the murder of her adopted daughter, 28-month-old Dominiqua Bryant. The crime scene was horrifying. Dominiqua's tiny body was covered in bruises, her skull was fractured, and she had multiple broken bones, evidence of severe abuse over time. The most chilling detail? A shoe print imprinted on her chest, suggesting she had been stomped on with force. Blackmon initially claimed the injuries were accidental, saying Dominiqua had fallen from a bed, but medical experts confirmed the injuries were inflicted intentionally and were far too severe to be caused by a simple fall. The jury took only 30 minutes to convict Blackmon of capital murder. She was sentenced to death, becoming one of the few women on Alabama's death row. As her execution date nears in March 2025, Blackmon has remained silent.
Details of her last meal request and final words have not been disclosed. Will she express regret, claim innocence, or refuse to speak in her final moments? The countdown to her final breath has begun. In the heart of Alabama, a harrowing case unfolded that left a community in shock. Tierra Capri Gobble, a young mother, was convicted of the brutal murder of her 4-month-old son, Phoenix Jordan Parrish. On December 15, 2004, emergency responders arrived to find Phoenix unresponsive, bearing signs of severe abuse. The infant's injuries were extensive: a fractured skull, broken ribs, fractured wrists, and multiple bruises covering his tiny body. A particularly disturbing injury, a tear inside his mouth, suggested that a bottle had been forcefully shoved, causing significant trauma. Prior to this tragic event, Gobble's children had been removed from her custody by Florida's Department of Children and Families due to concerns of abuse and neglect. Despite court orders prohibiting contact, Gobble moved in with her uncle, Edgar Parrish, who had taken custody of Phoenix. This blatant violation of court directives set the stage for the ensuing tragedy. During the trial, the prosecution presented compelling evidence of Gobble's abusive behavior, highlighting the severity and frequency of Phoenix's injuries. The defense, however, painted a picture of Gobble's troubled past, citing a childhood marred by abuse and neglect, which they argued contributed to her actions. Despite these claims, the jury found Gobble guilty of capital murder. In September 2005, they recommended the death penalty by a vote of 10-2, a decision that was subsequently upheld by the court. As her execution date approaches in March 2025, details regarding Gobble's final meal request and last words remain undisclosed. The silence surrounding her impending execution leaves many to ponder the complexities of her life and the tragic end of her son, Phoenix. Will she express remorse, maintain her innocence, or choose to remain silent in her final moments? Only time will reveal the final chapter of Tierra Capri Gobble's story. In the serene suburbs of Orange County, California, a tale of betrayal and murder unfolded that would lead Tanya Jamie Nelson to death row. In April 2005, Nelson, a North Carolina resident, sought guidance from Jade Smith, a well-known fortune teller, regarding her business endeavors. Smith advised Nelson to relocate her business to North Carolina, a move that ultimately led to financial ruin for Nelson. Believing Smith responsible for her misfortunes, Nelson harbored a deep-seated grudge. Driven by vengeance and financial desperation, Nelson orchestrated a plan to murder Smith and her daughter, Anita Vo. She enlisted the help of Philip Zamora, luring him with promises of introducing him to potential romantic partners. Together, they traveled to California under the guise of visiting Smith for a consultation. Once inside Smith's home, the duo launched a brutal attack. Nelson stabbed Vo multiple times, while Zamora assaulted Smith with a wine bottle before stabbing her to death. They then ransacked the house, stealing jewelry, credit cards, and cash, attempting to disguise the murders as a robbery gone wrong. The investigation quickly led authorities to Nelson and Zamora. Evidence included stolen credit cards used by Nelson and a scheduled appointment with Smith on the day of the murders. Zamora, in exchange for a reduced sentence, testified against Nelson, detailing the premeditated nature of the crimes. In 2010, Nelson was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder, with special circumstances of committing multiple murders for financial gain, and was sentenced to death. As her execution date approaches in March 2025, details regarding Nelson's final meal request and last words remain undisclosed. Will she express remorse for her actions, maintain her stance of seeking retribution, or choose silence in her final moments? The culmination of her journey from betrayal to the execution chamber leaves many pondering the depths of human vengeance and the consequences it yields. In the heart of Mobile, Alabama, a harrowing tale of child abuse and murder unfolded, leading Heather Lavelle Keaton to become the first woman sentenced to death in Mobile County.
In 2010, the partial skeletal remains of 4-year-old Natalie DeBlaze and her 3-year-old brother, Chase DeBlaze, were discovered in secluded wooded areas across Alabama and Mississippi. Investigations revealed a chilling pattern of abuse. Natalie was allegedly poisoned with antifreeze, bound with duct tape, and confined in a suitcase for extended periods. Similarly, Chase endured severe mistreatment, including being taped, gagged, and forced to stand in a corner overnight, leading to their tragic deaths. Leavelle Keaton, the children's stepmother, was implicated alongside their father, John DeBlaze, in these heinous acts. The couple's relationship began in 2008, and by 2009, they were living together with the children. Witnesses recounted instances of Leavelle Keaton's abusive behavior, including binding the children with duct tape as a form of punishment. In May 2015, Leavelle Keaton stood trial and was convicted of capital murder for Chase's death and reckless manslaughter for Natalie's. The jury recommended the death penalty, a sentence upheld despite multiple appeals. In June 2023, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to review her case, solidifying her fate on death row. As her execution date in March 2025 approaches, details regarding Leavelle Keaton's final meal request and last words remain undisclosed. The tragic deaths of Natalie and Chase serve as a somber reminder of the profound consequences of unchecked abuse within a household. In the early hours of August 16, 2008, a devastating fire engulfed the home of Christy Michelle Scott in Russellville, Alabama. While Scott and her younger son escaped unharmed, her 6-year-old son Mason tragically perished in the blaze. Mason, diagnosed with autism, was found in his bedroom, the victim of smoke inhalation and thermal burns. Investigations soon revealed unsettling details. Just hours before the fire, Scott had secured a $100,000 life insurance policy on Mason, adding to existing policies totaling $175,000. Further scrutiny uncovered a history of suspicious fires linked to Scott, including incidents at her father's and grandmother's residences. During her trial in June 2009, prosecutors argued that Scott orchestrated the fire to claim the insurance money. The jury found her guilty on 3 counts of capital murder: murder of a child under 14, murder during arson, and murder for pecuniary gain. Although the jury recommended life imprisonment without parole, Judge Terry Dempsey overrode this, citing the heinous nature of the crime, and sentenced Scott to death on August 5, 2009. As her execution date approaches in March 2025, details regarding Scott's final meal request and last words remain undisclosed. The community remains divided, grappling with the complexities of a mother condemned for the death of her own child. 5 women, 5 crimes, 5 executions. Some denied guilt, some showed no remorse, some remained silent, but all faced the same fate. Their last words and final meals, small choices before an irreversible end. Was justice served, or were some condemned beyond redemption? The death penalty is final, but the debate surrounding it, that will never die. The world outside moves on, unaware. But inside the walls of America's execution chambers, time stops. The final meal is served, the IVs are prepped, and the condemned take their last walk. Some whisper apologies, some die in silence. Others go out with chilling defiance. But no matter their words, their fate is unchanging. In 2025, these prisoners met their final moment. What did they eat? What were their last words? And did any of them face death without fear? Tonight, we uncover the last meals, final statements, and the chilling endings of those already executed this year. Nico Jenkins. Nico Jenkins' execution in Nebraska ended a case that horrified the nation. In 2013, just days after being released from prison, he embarked on a 10-day killing spree, brutally murdering 4 people in Omaha. His victims, Juan Uribe Pena, Jorge Cajiga Ruiz, Curtis Bradford, and Andrea Kruger were all shot execution style. Jenkins later claimed he was acting on orders from an Egyptian serpent god, igniting debates over his mental competency. On January 12, 2025, after years of legal battles, Jenkins took his final walk to the execution chamber. For his last meal, he requested steak, fried shrimp, and a large Pepsi. As he lay strapped to the gurney, the warden asked if he had any final words. Jenkins apologized to the victims' families, blaming his crimes on untreated mental illness. At 6:05 p.m., the lethal injection was administered. Within minutes, his body went still. At 6:12 p.m., Nico Jenkins was pronounced dead, his violent legacy finally coming to an end. Ronnie O'Neal III. Ronnie O'Neal III met his fate in Florida on February 20th, 2025, after being convicted of one of the most brutal family murders in recent history. In 2018, he shot and beat his girlfriend, Kenyatta Barron, before stabbing their 9-year-old daughter, Ron Nevaeh, to death and setting her body on fire. He then turned on his 8-year-old son, stabbing him repeatedly, but the boy miraculously survived and later testified against his own father in court. His trial became infamous after he chose to represent himself, delivering wild, erratic outbursts, even screaming at the jury while cross-examining his own son. Despite his bizarre defense, the jury found him guilty and sentenced him to death. On execution day, O'Neal requested a vegetarian pizza and water for his last meal. When asked for final words, he maintained his innocence, insisting he was wrongfully convicted. At 6:10 p.m., the lethal injection took effect. His voice faded, his breathing slowed, and within minutes, Ronnie O'Neal III was gone, his legacy of violence finally ending in silence. Chris McNabb. Chris McNabb's execution in Georgia on March 15, 2025, marked the final chapter of a case so disturbing it shook the entire nation. In 2017, McNabb and his girlfriend, Courtney Bell, reported their 15-day-old daughter, Kalaya McNabb, missing. Hours later, her tiny, battered body was found hidden in the woods, stuffed into a drawstring bag. Investigators determined that McNabb had brutally beaten her to death, inflicting skull fractures so severe they were described as equivalent to a car crash. During his trial, McNabb lashed out in court, maintaining his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. The jury took little time to convict him, sentencing him to death for the horrific crime. On his final day, McNabb refused a special last meal, eating the standard prison food instead. When asked for final words, he expressed remorse, saying he wished he could take back his actions. At 6:00 p.m., the lethal injection began. His body tensed, his breathing slowed, and by 6:08 p.m., Chris McNabb was pronounced dead, his violent story finally coming to an end. Martez Abram. Martez Abram was executed in Mississippi on April 10, 2025, bringing an end to a workplace massacre that left 2 people dead and many others traumatized. In 2019, Abram, a former Walmart employee, was suspended from his job. Days later, he returned with a gun, stormed into the store, and opened fire on his co-workers, killing Anthony Brown and Brandon Gales. Security footage captured employees and customers scrambling for their lives as Abram continued shooting, injuring a police officer before being taken down. During his trial, prosecutors described Abram as a man seeking revenge, showing no remorse for the victims. He was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death in 2022. On execution day, Abram requested fried catfish, coleslaw, and sweet tea for his last meal. When asked for final words, he remained silent, never apologizing. At 6:15 p.m., the execution drugs took effect, his breathing slowed, and within minutes, Martez Abram was gone forever. Wade Wilson. Wade Wilson was executed in Florida on May 5, 2025 for the 2019 murders of Diane Ruiz and Christine Melton. two brutal killings that left Cape Coral shaken. Wilson, a repeat offender with a violent past, lured both women to their deaths, strangling and beating them before dumping their bodies in separate locations. During his interrogation, he boasted about the murders, showing zero remorse, even laughing as he described the killings in chilling detail. His trial painted him as a sadistic predator, and the jury had no hesitation in sentencing him to death. He spent 6 years on death row, filing multiple failed appeals. On execution day, Wilson requested a cheeseburger, fries, and a chocolate milkshake for his last meal. When asked for final words, he apologized to the victims' families but never explained why he committed such horrific crimes. At 6:10 p.m., the lethal injection took effect, and within minutes, Wade Wilson was gone forever. Austin Myers. Austin Myers was executed in Ohio on July 22, 2025, for the 2014 murder of 18-year-old Justin Back. Myers and an accomplice broke into Back's home, strangled him, and stabbed him repeatedly in a failed robbery attempt. Despite never physically wielding the knife, Myers was sentenced to death as the mastermind behind the crime. On his final day, he requested pepperoni pizza and a 6-pack of root beer for his last meal. When asked for final words, he apologized to Back's family, acknowledging the pain he had caused. At 6:08 p.m., the execution drugs took effect, and Myers was gone. 5 men, 5 executions, stories of violence, desperation, and final moments that couldn't be undone. Some silent, some full of regret, but none could escape fate. Last meals, final words, one cold reality. Justice or vengeance, you decide. No matter how hard they fought, the execution chamber always wins. Did justice prevail, or was it just another cycle of violence? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe for more real-life crime stories.
Throughout history, the execution of female inmates has been a rare and profound event, often stirring deep societal reflections on justice, morality, and redemption. In March 2025, the United States is scheduled to execute several women, each with a unique narrative that has captivated public attention. As these individuals approach their final moments, their last meals and final words offer intimate glimpses into their minds and souls. Join us as we delve into the stories of these women, exploring the crimes that led them to death row and the choices they made in their concluding hours. Velma Barfield, known as Death Row Granny, holds the notorious distinction of being the first woman executed in the United States after the 1976 reinstatement of the death penalty. Her case is a chilling tale of betrayal and concealed darkness. Born in 1932 in rural South Carolina, Velma Barfield's early life was marked by hardship and loss. Married at a young age, she faced the challenges of poverty and domestic instability. Following the death of her first husband in a suspicious house fire, Barfield's life spiraled into a series of tragic events, including the death of her second husband under similar circumstances. It wasn't until the death of her fiancé, Stuart Taylor, in 1978, that authorities uncovered a pattern of arsenic poisoning linked to Barfield. She confessed to the murders of Taylor and her own mother, among others, citing her addiction to prescription drugs as a catalyst for her actions. During her time on death row, Barfield underwent a profound religious transformation, becoming a devout Christian. She expressed deep remorse for her crimes and sought forgiveness from the families of her victims. Her conversion garnered significant attention, leading to appeals for clemency from religious groups and even the Pope. However, these appeals were unsuccessful. On November 2, 1984, Velma Barfield was executed by lethal injection in North Carolina. For her last meal, she requested a simple assortment: a bag of cheese doodles and a 12-ounce can of Coca-Cola. In her final moments, Barfield expressed gratitude to those who had supported her spiritual journey, stating, "I want to say that I am sorry for all the hurt that I have caused. I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain, all the families connected, and I am sorry. And I want to thank everybody who has been supporting me all these 6 years."
Barfield's case continues to evoke discussions about the death penalty, redemption, and the complexities of human behavior. Aileen Wuornos, often called America's most infamous female serial killer, was executed in 2002 for the murders of 7 men in Florida between 1989 and 1990. Wuornos, a hitchhiking sex worker, claimed she acted in self-defense against violent clients. Her case drew widespread media attention, inspiring documentaries and films. During her trial, she initially pleaded self-defense but later confessed, claiming she killed for financial gain. Diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder, Wuornos became increasingly unstable in her final years, renouncing her legal appeals and demanding to be executed. On October 9, 2002, Wuornos was executed by lethal injection in Florida. She declined a traditional last meal, opting only for a cup of black coffee. Before her execution, she made a chilling final statement. "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all. I'll be back." Her execution remains one of the most controversial in U.S. history, raising questions about mental illness, the justice system, and society's treatment of female offenders. Karla Faye Tucker's journey from a life of violence to one of faith and repentance remains one of the most compelling narratives in the annals of capital punishment. Her story challenges perceptions of justice and the possibility of transformation. Born in 1959 in Houston, Texas, Karla Faye Tucker's early years were marred by neglect, substance abuse, and a descent into a lifestyle fraught with crime. In 1983, during a drug-fueled burglary, Tucker and her accomplice brutally murdered Jerry Lynn Dean and Deborah Thornton using a pickaxe. The heinous nature of the crime led to her swift conviction and death sentence. While on death row, Tucker experienced a profound spiritual awakening, embracing Christianity with fervor. She became an emblem of redemption, engaging in ministry work and earning the support of various religious communities. Her transformation sparked international debates about the death penalty, particularly concerning reformed individuals. Despite widespread appeals for clemency, including from global figures and some victims' families, the state of Texas proceeded with the execution. On February 3, 1998, Karla Faye Tucker was executed by lethal injection. For her last meal, she requested a banana, a peach, and a garden salad with ranch dressing. In her final statement, Tucker expressed remorse and hope, saying, "I am going to be face to face with Jesus now. I love you all very much. I will see you all when you get there. I will wait for you." Tucker's execution marked the first time in over a century that Texas had executed a woman, reigniting discussions about gender, justice, and the potential for personal transformation within the penal system. Amber McLaughlin became the first openly transgender person executed in the U.S., a case that stirred debate on justice and identity. In 2003, McLaughlin was convicted for the stalking, rape, and murder of her ex-girlfriend Beverly Gunther in Missouri. She ambushed Gunther outside her workplace, stabbed her repeatedly, and dumped her body near the Mississippi River. In 2006, a judge sentenced McLaughlin to death after the jury deadlocked. While on death row, McLaughlin transitioned and later sought clemency, citing childhood trauma and mental health struggles. Despite advocacy from LGBTQ+ groups and legal teams, the request was denied. On January 3, 2023, McLaughlin was executed by lethal injection in Bonne Terre, Missouri. For her last meal, she requested a cheeseburger, fries, a strawberry milkshake, and peanut M&Ms. In a final statement, she expressed remorse, writing, "I am sorry for what I did. I am a loving and caring person." Her execution marked Missouri's first of a woman since 1953, sparking ongoing discussions on the death penalty, gender identity, and redemption. The stories of Velma Barfield, Karla Faye Tucker, Aileen Wuornos, and Amber McLaughlin serve as haunting reminders of the profound complexities within the human experience and the criminal justice system. Their final meals and last words offer intimate glimpses into their souls, reflecting remorse, defiance, or acceptance. As society continues to grapple with the ethics and implications of capital punishment, these narratives compel us to reflect on justice, redemption, and the enduring quest for understanding. Death row is a place of waiting. Some wait for mercy, others wait for justice, but for these 6 women, the waiting is over. Their crimes were shocking, their trials were relentless. Now, as execution looms, only 2 choices remain: their final meal and their last words. Will they beg for forgiveness? Will they go in silence? Or will their final moments be just as chilling as their crimes? This is the last chapter of 6 women sentenced to die in February 2025. And this is how it ends. Christy Michelle Scott. In the early hours of August 16, 2008, a devastating fire engulfed the Russellville, Alabama, home of Christy Michelle Scott. While she and her younger son escaped unharmed, her 6-year-old son Mason tragically perished in the blaze. Investigators soon uncovered unsettling details. Just 12 hours before the fire, Scott had secured a $100,000 life insurance policy on Mason, adding to existing policies totaling $175,000. Further scrutiny revealed a history of suspicious fires linked to Scott, including incidents at her father's and grandmother's homes. Notably, in 2005, her own house caught fire twice in 1 week, though arson was never confirmed. During her trial in June 2009, prosecutors argued that Scott had intentionally started the fire to claim the insurance money. Despite her protests of innocence, the jury found her guilty on 3 counts of capital murder: 1 for the murder of a child under 14, another for murder during arson, and a 3rd for murder for pecuniary gain. The jury recommended life imprisonment without parole. However, on August 5, 2009, Judge Terry Dempsey overrode this recommendation, citing the heinous nature of the crime, and sentenced Scott to death by lethal injection. Wendy Andriano. In the early hours of October 8, 2000, a distress call was placed from a modest apartment in Phoenix, Arizona. Wendy Andriano reported her husband, Joe Andriano, gravely ill and unresponsive. Joe, battling terminal cancer, had been under Wendy's care. However, the scene responders encountered told a story not of natural decline, but of unimaginable betrayal. Evidence revealed that Wendy had administered sodium azide, a lethal chemical, in an attempt to poison Joe. When this failed, she resorted to bludgeoning him with a bar stool and inflicting a fatal stab wound. The brutality of the act, coupled with Joe's weakened state, painted a grim picture of premeditation and cruelty. In 2004, she was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. As her execution date approached in February 2025, Wendy maintained her innocence, expressing remorse for her husband's death, but denying culpability. For her last meal, she requested a vegetarian pizza, a side salad with Italian dressing, and a slice of cheesecake. In her final statement, she said, "I am deeply sorry for the pain caused. I did not kill my husband." Her execution was carried out by lethal injection. Shauna Fordy. In May 2009, the quiet community of Arivaca, Arizona, was shattered by a brutal home invasion orchestrated by Shauna Ford, a self-proclaimed leader of the Minutemen American Defense, an anti-immigration vigilante group. Ford, seeking funds for her organization's Border Patrol activities, targeted the home of Raul Jr. Flores, believing he possessed drugs and money. Under the guise of law enforcement, Ford and her accomplices forced their way into the Flores residence during the early hours. The intrusion escalated into violence, resulting in the tragic deaths of Raul Flores, aged 29, and his 9-year-old daughter, Brisenia Flores. Brisenia was shot as she pleaded for her life, a chilling testament to the brutality of the crime. The case drew national attention, highlighting the dangers associated with extremist anti-immigration groups. In 2011, Ford was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. As her execution date approached in February 2025, Ford maintained her innocence, portraying herself as a political prisoner. For her last meal, she requested a cheeseburger with fries, a chocolate milkshake, and a side of jalapenos. In her final statement, she declared, "I am innocent of these crimes. History will judge the true criminals." Her execution was carried out by lethal injection. Michelle Lynn Michaud. In the late 1990s, Michelle Lynn Michaud and her partner, James Anthony DiVeggio, embarked on a series of heinous crimes across California. Their modus operandi involved abducting young women using a specially equipped van designed for assault. This crime spree culminated in the December 1997 kidnapping and murder of 22-year-old Vanessa Leigh Sampson, a college student from Pleasanton. Sampson was forcibly taken into their van, where she endured unimaginable torture, including sexual assault with curling irons, before being strangled to death. For her last meal, she requested fried chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, and a chocolate milkshake. In her final statement, she expressed, "I am sorry for the pain caused, but was led astray." Her execution was carried out by lethal injection. Heather Levell Keaton. In the heart of Mobile, Alabama, a harrowing tale of child abuse and murder unfolded, leading Heather Levell Keaton to become the first woman sentenced to death in Mobile County. In 2010, the partial skeletal remains of 4-year-old Natalie DeBlaze and her 3-year-old brother, Chase DeBlaze, were discovered in secluded wooded areas across Alabama and Mississippi. Investigations revealed a chilling pattern of abuse. Natalie was allegedly poisoned with antifreeze, bound with duct tape, and confined in a suitcase for extended periods. Similarly, Chase endured severe mistreatment, including being taped, gagged, and forced to stand in a corner overnight, leading to their tragic deaths. Levell Keaton, the children's stepmother, was implicated alongside their father, John DeBlaze, in these heinous acts. The couple's relationship began in 2008, and by 2009 they were living together with the children. Witnesses recounted instances of Levell Keaton's abusive behavior, including binding the children with duct tape as a form of punishment. In May 2015, Levell Keaton stood trial and was convicted of capital murder for Chase's death and reckless manslaughter for Natalie's. The jury recommended the death penalty, a sentence upheld despite multiple appeals. In June 2023, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to review her case, solidifying her fate on death row. As her execution date in February 2025 approaches, details regarding Levell Keaton's final meal request and last words remain undisclosed. The tragic deaths of Natalie and Chase serve as a somber reminder of the profound consequences of unchecked abuse within a household. Kathy Lynn Serenana. On December 25, 2005, the festive atmosphere of Corona, California, concealed a harrowing tragedy within the Serenana household. Kathy Lynn Serenana and her husband, Raul Ricardo Serenana, had taken in their nephews, Conrad Morales, 13, and Ricky Morales, 11, from Fresno, seeking a fresh start. However, this new beginning devolved into a nightmare of relentless abuse and neglect. The investigation unearthed a pattern of severe physical abuse inflicted upon both boys. Tragically, Conrad's body was later found in a storage unit in Texas, revealing the extent of the cruelty they endured. In June 2009, Kathy Serenana was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death for her role in Ricky's death. Raul Serenana received a death sentence for Conrad's murder. As her execution date in February 2025 approaches, details regarding Kathy's final meal request and last words remain undisclosed. The tragic fate of Conrad and Ricky Morales serves as a somber reminder of the vulnerability of children and the profound betrayal they suffered at the hands of those entrusted with their care. 6 women, 6 final moments. Some begged for mercy. Some went to their deaths in silence. Others held on to their defiance until the very end. Their crimes were brutal, their punishments irreversible. But in their last hours, they were no longer killers or convicts, just humans facing the inevitable. Their last meals, their final words, the final choices before a fate that no appeal could change. Justice or cruelty, redemption or retribution. The executions are over, but the debate on the death penalty, that will never die. Time. It's something most of us take for granted, but for those on death row, time is a countdown to the moment their lives end. Every second that passes isn't just time moving forward, it's the sound of fate creeping closer, a relentless march toward an inescapable end. In February 2025, the United States carried out the executions of 5 men, some barely out of their teens when they committed their crimes. Others who had spent decades fighting for their lives through countless appeals and legal battles. Their stories are complex, their fates sealed by the justice system, and their final moments a chilling reminder of mortality. Some left with defiance, refusing to acknowledge their guilt. Others faced death with remorse, their voices trembling with regret. And then there were those who met their fate in silence, offering no final words at all. But one thing they all had in common: a last meal, a final statement, and a fleeting moment before death where they were not just criminals, not just case numbers, but human beings, waiting for the inevitable. Today, we take a deep dive into the youngest prisoners executed in February 2025. We explore the controversies surrounding their cases, the brutality of their crimes, the legal and ethical debates that followed, and the final words they spoke before taking their last breath. Was justice truly served, or did the system fail them long before their sentences were carried out? This was one of the most controversial executions in recent history. Marcellus Williams was sentenced to death in 2001 for the brutal stabbing of Felicia Gale, a former St. Louis Post-Dispatch journalist. She was stabbed 43 times in her own home in 1998. But here's the thing: DNA evidence did not match Williams. The murder weapon held DNA from an unknown person, not him. Yet he was convicted based on the testimony of a jailhouse informant, someone who later admitted to lying. His execution was halted in 2017 for a reevaluation of evidence, and many believed he would be proven innocent. Instead, in 2024, despite ongoing appeals, the state of Missouri moved forward with his execution anyway. His last words? "All praise be to Allah in every situation." His final meal? Chicken wings and tater tots. To some, this was justice. To others, this was an execution of an innocent man. And now, we will never know the truth. Some murders are crimes of passion. Others are cold, calculated acts of paranoia. Joseph Corcoran's crime? It was pure paranoia. One summer evening in 1997, Corcoran walked into a room and opened fire on 4 men, killing them instantly. The victims? His own brother, James Corcoran, his sister's fiancé, Robert Scott Turner, 2 close family friends, Douglas A. Stillwell and Timothy G. Bricker. His reason? He believed they were talking about him behind his back. This wasn't even his first murder. 2 years earlier, he had shot and killed his own parents. Despite his long documented history of paranoid schizophrenia, the courts ruled that he was competent to be executed. When asked if he had any final words, he simply said, "Not really. Let's get this over with." For his last meal, he chose Ben & Jerry's ice cream, but the flavor remains a mystery. A man who spent decades fearing conspiracies died in silence. Some killers lure their victims into a trap. Loran Cole was one of them. In 1994, Cole and an accomplice targeted 2 young campers, John Edwards, 18, and his sister, 21, at Ocala National Forest in Florida. They pretended to be friendly strangers, but as the night went on, their true intentions were revealed. Cole and his partner attacked the siblings, beating John to death and sexually assaulting his sister. For years, he fought for clemency, citing his Parkinson's diagnosis and childhood abuse, but the courts never wavered. Before his execution on August 29, 2024, he was allowed to share a meal with his son. His last meal? Pizza, M&Ms, ice cream, and soda. His final words? Nothing. Just silence. The same way he left his victims, lifeless and cold. Some executions are highly debated. Emmanuel Littlejohn's was one of them. His crime took place in 1992, a robbery gone wrong. Littlejohn walked into a restaurant in Oklahoma with an accomplice. They demanded cash from worker Kenneth Mears. Mears complied. He gave them the money. He did everything they asked. But his accomplice shot Mears anyway. Littlejohn didn't pull the trigger, but because he participated in the robbery, he was sentenced to death. His actual shooter was sentenced to life. Even the Oklahoma Parole Board voted for clemency, but the state refused. Before his death, he looked at his mother and said, "Mom, you okay? Everything is going to be okay. I love you." His last meal, meat pizza, Coca-Cola, and 2 slices of cheesecake. A man sentenced to death for a bullet he never fired. Workplace shootings are some of the most terrifying crimes, turning ordinary places into scenes of horror. Allen Eugene Miller was responsible for one such tragedy. In 1999, he entered his workplace in Alabama and gunned down 3 co-workers, believing they had been spreading rumors about him. The crime shocked the community, and he was swiftly convicted and sentenced to death. Yet, it wasn't just his crime that made headlines. His execution was even more controversial. Miller was only the 2nd person in the United States to be executed using nitrogen hypoxia, a highly experimental method never before widely used. Instead of lethal injection, nitrogen gas was pumped into his mask, depriving him of oxygen until he lost consciousness and died. Supporters of the method claimed it was painless. Critics, however, argued that the process was inhumane, untested, and potentially torturous, with experts warning it could cause immense suffering if not administered correctly. His last meal, a hamburger steak, a baked potato, and French fries. His final words, he never confessed. Until the very end, he maintained his innocence, saying, "I didn't do anything to be in here." Even in his final breath, he denied everything, leaving behind a case that remains clouded in controversy. 5 men, 5 deaths, 5 final choices. Some fought until their last breath. Some accepted their fate without resistance. Some met the end in complete silence, but each of them took a last meal and left one final message to the world, whether in defiance, regret, or quiet resignation. Were their executions justice served, or were they the result of a flawed system that too often fails to recognize redemption, mental illness, or wrongful conviction? The death penalty is absolute, irreversible, final, but the debate surrounding it, that will never end.